Well, the plan was to be perhaps a little bit more prepared for this in long format, but I thought anyway I will just test and wing it. I'm still in the process of just doing this mostly for myself, getting momentum on this. But I thought a little bit about it. What should I actually? What's fruitful to bring up? And I thought that, and it's actually something that I come back to quite often. And it's, well, you could say it's basically just about decision making in life in general. And I mean, there are so many angles you can go at this because so I can't delve into everything about it. But one way to just getting into it is that one underlying assumption I have in this is that we all want to improve ourselves or the world or do something that's constructive and we all have problems in life. We want to achieve more, or we always have something that we want to get better at and or solve and so forth. And that's why decision making is so crucial. And another underlying assumption to that is that knowledge is basically perhaps the only way you could argue to be better at that. And if you would argue, well, there's no this, it's this too, like for example motivation or whatever, you could argue that, well, in order to get motivation, you need to have knowledge about how do you get it in the first place. So it's basically, you could say, all about it is knowledge. So and thus the underlying assumption also became that to optimize for what you want is basically always to crank up the knowledge that you simulate in your brain, that you learn and then re-simulate in order to repeat it so that it's actually ingrained in your mind and you build new neural pathways. And so that's my sort of guess the introduction on this. And I think I will go extremely analytically deep on this, and it's always about degrees. It depends on what you compare to, but most would, I think, consider it analytically deep. There are many areas of depth in human life, but if you just talk pure analytical skills in sort of a, what you would call it, rational thinking, it's for most people I think it's considered quite deep. And so and there are many ways many reasons that or many many reasons for why I think this is crucial. I think it's basically, first of all, amazing that we don't learn this in school. And I can guess that one reason could be that it's perhaps not everywhere considered that it's true. But I think, or that just most people don't understand it. And I mean, you can't have an understanding in the most complicated depth of philosophy of science, perhaps in there, and hope to transmit that to children or people in young age when they need to. And some people don't have ambition or capacities, let's say, to strive for that knowledge depth and what should we call it, that rigor in their thinking, in the analytical things, so that you can make good decision and get a solid foundation of the knowledge that is necessary for good decision making. And so I'm going to go a little bit into this topic and the basic this premise is the right word, the basic theory here is that and it goes back, I mean, if this talk would have been made several hundred years ago, depending on who you would ask for, of course, but most people would argue, like today it's obvious, let's say, okay, science is basically knowledge in large. I mean, you have cities and stuff, and that's knowledge too, but in large, science captures really much of what knowledge actually entails, or what it means to have knowledge about how things actually are. If at least if you're not religious, and where I live in Sweden, it's common to they say like that. Well, that's basically the thing that you get respect, or people trust you when you reference to. But that would just not be the case for most people. It's some 100 years ago. And the reason for that is, well, basically you could say it's enlightenment. So, and why I'm bringing this up is because the foundation for really good knowledge, um, and what type of knowledge and how you should navigate. Well, basically, I would argue that any science, even humanities, sort of is credible or good for sound decision making, but even more so perhaps natural sciences. And this is, let's just begin with that. The Enlightenment and all all the philosophy of science, the sort of foundation for. We have science before that, of course, even in ancient Greek, but the philosophy of science of it was not sort of as it was not, if I guess not as hostile to religion, even though I would just a side note, I would not necessarily say that this argument is against religion necessarily, just so. But anyway, it's still the Enlightenment and everything that was meant that we got a very solid. I mean, David Hume and Voltaire, perhaps too, and Descartes before that. In the what's this Descartes? It's 16th century, I guess. That laid the foundation for what we today have as like given in what is solid foundation. But what is also interesting in this is that, as I mentioned when I said that it's perhaps even better with the natural sciences, and this is not just sort of a preference that comes from. I for example can sometimes find the humanities more emotionally interesting in many ways, even though I think natural sciences also is extremely interesting. It's just I can't choose, but it's anyway still so that I would argue, and I don't think I think many would agree that what's in line with philosophy of science in general, the sort of foundation that we have for our understanding today of how the world works, is that is congruent. Is that the right word? That's more connected to our. That's most close. Natural sciences are much more, and when natural science I mean basically physics, chemistry, biology, I guess mathematics too, and engineering is sort of, yeah. But those are so close to that, while you go into the humanities, it's almost as if some parts of those, even those academic fields, even question perhaps the philosophy, especially today with sort of, I guess, postmodernism and stuff. So and it goes quite deep, and you could, there are many, but now this is such a deep topic that it's hard to not get boiled down on the details too much. But my view on this is, if you, because in the humanities, which I respect very much also, but in there are some thoughts that sort of try to criticize the philosophy of science. That's basically the foundation for the natural sciences. They're sort of skeptical about that, as and they all see it as an intrusion sort of on other fields perhaps. And I wrote a paper on this when I was in the university, but I now ended up in thinking that yes, there's sort of some sound independence in humanities, but I also think it's a very, very great danger in thinking you're sort of immune against insights in other fields that I have to say have even better solid foundation as source of knowledge, namely the natural sciences. I mean, the rigor in those sciences are amazing. It's so, I mean, the details you have in physics, in chemistry, and biology also, math, of course, even though it's not obvious if it's a science or whatever it is. But I mean, that's unprecedented. It really doesn't exist in humanities in the same way. You can do sort of, yeah. And so what I'm actually going to argue is that that foundation for knowledge is more, it's not better, it's not necessarily more interesting, but it's more solid. It's a better foundation for decision making than other types of knowledge, because it's so, it's like almost like, I think it was economics, for example, is sort of a, all sometimes it's well, it's not humanities, but it's sort of, so sometimes considered as a soft science, not the hard sciences, and hard sciences are actually synonymous with natural sciences. So the soft sciences, not chemistry, biology, and so forth. Sometimes national, or it's called national economics in Sweden, but economics in general is sometimes considered sort of the king in the not humanities, but soft sciences, because it's some rigor to it, really. You still have sort of, you can count and audit a lot and so forth, but where were I? So I lost my train of thought here. But yeah, I forgot what I was about to say, but anyway, to have the natural sciences as a foundation. Yeah, I was about to mention that I think it was Max Planck who said that, the physicist who went a bit into economics, and he basically said that, and this is from a physicist that's like super sharp, it's like almost sort of an Einstein in the 20th century. And he said that basically economics was, I think he said that it was too hard, and it's basically too, all the results are insecure and vague or something like that, and it's basically too hard. And then you say, well, but does that mean that they're sharp in those fields and in the natural sciences? But I think the accurate answer is actually that, I mean, the brain power sort of in IQ in physics and so forth is, I mean, amazing. So I think this honest answer is rather that those people who understand how unsecure the ground is, how far from certain you are on the conclusions that you perhaps have in the humanities or even national economics, they understand that it's too messy to actually give a secure, good result. You get hints, of course you explore things, but oftentimes it's basically just that you're so naive about the conclusion that you get into. It's not a solid foundation. It's not wrong necessarily, but it's very hard to have a solid foundation for decision making, secure knowledge. You're basically most of the time arguably fooling yourself to believe that you have the right answer, because it's such a, to have the rigor in that and really be sure about this is the truth. It's not impossible in the humanities or in the, but to have, and that's the reason for why I and many others argue that it's much better foundation for decision making if you focus on the natural sciences but not like exclusively, of course, and not like not even like you should focus 80% on them and the rest 20% on the humanities. I mean, you could perhaps even go for 50-50, but I would always say that if their knowledge from one field against another, I would in most cases have a little more respect for all, in all cases, have a little more respect to what it says in the natural science, because it's counteracted again in the from the humanities or from other yeah, soft sciences. It's yeah, and one sort of counter argument for this, and yeah, I said I would go deep, and most people would say that, well, this is not relevant for decision making, but I think actually, if you really have a solid foundation for what you're indulging in and what you're choosing to let your brain simulate by what you read and what you will listen to, and videos and stuff, I think it's yeah, necessary, and not get too focused on misled by some things, in especially in humanities today, which are very debated on many levels. And while saying this, I also want to emphasize that this is not an argument for that it's bad to criticize, or to some extent that we all always want to find arguments and question even the deepest philosophical assumption about science that we use and stuff. I mean, and you could argue that's even what happens sometimes when you go deeper and deeper into science as a new exploration. You actually were wrong about some things, perhaps in philosophy of science, some would say just in science in general. But and so when you question, for example, if you sort of question the much of science as just, we'll say that it's actually more about power, for example, that's a common thing. I never meant to go into this actually. This is it's a minefield basically, but I would, for example, look, yeah, there's a lot of truth to that it's all about power, but the reason it is for that is, I would argue, that's because of biological reasons. So it is a lot of truth to it, but the reason we should respect the notion that there's a lot about power and egoistic incentives, that's because of biology. And why is biology a better foundation? Well, it's because it's based on and this goes into reductionism basically, and I don't know exactly how sort of broad the definition for reductionism. I guess it depends on who you ask, but and there is some arguments with what's it called, emergent in this, and which is I don't think I should go into that too much, but the reason for why biology is such a, well, it is the natural sciences basically more hard than sort of humanities, but it's still sort of, it's not like physics and not real like chemistry, but yeah, it is chemistry too, because and the most sort of solid foundation for that is the connection between the sciences, because we sort of our way to understand things is sort of dividing things between physics or chemistry and biology, but it's of course intertwined. And the reason why, for example, biological arguments are so solid is because there's a connection to chemistry. I mean, to question sort of chemistry, I mean, the laws of physics, you can't really do that. I mean, it's, yeah, you can question and develop them, but if there's something that goes against it, it's yeah, there could be an argument that you should have a better theory about it. But if it comes from the sort of the humanities or the soft sciences, I would be a bit skeptical. And so, yes, biological arguments can contribute to a lot of bad things. I mean, basically, the most traumatic experience we have in recent, in sort of in history's perspective, yesterday, that's Nazi Germany, and that's based on biological assumptions, which are, I mean, horrific. But That's very, and I think I guess we're just traumatized as a civilization because we understood that so we went so far as possible for what actually happened, but we made a misstep and you started to question biology as a science in itself, and a foundation for understanding and decision making. I don't say it's without dangers, but I would argue it's even more dangerous to ignore sign as I mean to ignore knowledge that exists. Yeah, that I would argue that's even more dangerous. I mean, not seeking for more understanding and knowledge is, I don't think that's the way to go. It's just backwards. So no. Uh, because I mean, because that's another discussion about morals, how we, man, better, I mean, it's better to have more knowledge about how you can make people more moral and ethical than just saying we should be that and we should not develop more insights into. I mean, knowledge is power and it can be for good or for bad, but then it's better to focus on ethics and morals and use science and insight we have to understand how we can make a moral, better ethical world, not to sort of suppress science and just because it had led to, but it's understandable. I mean, it's so traumatic with Nazi Germany, and that they sort of have a biological reasoning underlying their philosophy. But and anyone today understands that much of what they did, like to remove an ethnicity from Earth, just because we have biological origins, and there's arguments for evolution. That's sort of, there's no nothing in science at all that means that that should be done, that justifies it. It's just knowledge that we happen to have be biological creatures that differs in some way. We look different, and but th- that's a moral and ethical question, not about. So yeah, I guess I went into that discussion as well. But anyway, so biology as a model for understanding humans is so more potent and secure as a sort of um, rigid, or it's basically about probabilities, because you can never know anything for 100% sure about anything. It's everything is basically a bet, but it depends on how secure how confident you can be that it is the right thing. I mean, you could question everything on a philosophical level. It's always going to be 99.999 or even that. Perhaps in that 95, I don't know how confident you are that there exists atoms in the world. Are you 95 or 99.999? I don't know. But it's probably true. It's probably true that science is sort of, and we could go into the realist or non-realist debate and stuff too. But so yeah, I actually think that's enough for this time. Is for a little bit more of a long-term format, and so well, I'm not just I haven't really. For many people, it would have to say, okay, well, I get that part, but how is that going to help my decision making in reality? But I think to have an understanding and respect for the immense value of acquiring knowledge and what type of knowledge is. I mean, if you one way that I made myself understand this and what contributed to my understanding of all of this was actually reading a lot about Charlie Munger, which is a businessman, Warren Buffett's right hand in Berkshire Hathaway actually passed away a little more than a year ago. And he basically was one that it's even more clear for me that it's such a fallen sedation. He says that you basically should have most of the academic models in your head from most fields, because you don't want to be the man with a hammer who just, because for a man with a hammer, the problem looks like a nail. So if you're only schooled in biology, you would only see the biological view of the world. If you're only schooled in physics, you will only see that part of the world, and you will miss when you only have a hammer and you actually have a screw, and but you don't realize, okay, I should shift from chemistry to biology in order to understand what this problem is, what the solution is. I might even need to go into the humanities history. So to be a Renaissance man or woman, or read broadly, or is always a good thing, I guess. But yeah, so that's so he basically was very much for reading broadly and understanding a lot about it, and he pushed for this, like, natural sciences. If there's something that in those, I mean, chemistry, biology, physics, and it's comes some other soft science that says against it, basically perhaps listen a little bit more to the natural sciences. And there's also a bit, I mean, yeah, some small percentage of uncertainty in even those sciences. I mean, of course, they were not perfect